brief introduction. My name is Sam Suresh. I'm joining in from Singapore today, and I'm in the community team. And let's go maybe a very brief introduction with the rest of you before we begin with Alex. Okay, so you want to go next, Patricia?
Yes, hello, I'm Patricia from Geneva in Switzerland. I speak French. I contribute to the community team by organizing meetups and workshops in my country. And I'm also an event supporter, also known as a mentor for other workshops. I'm interested about this tool because I have been translating in the past, a very long time ago, before to contribute to community. But it's also very good to share the knowledge inside our local communities, because very often the people do not even participate to the main Slack, only to our local Slack, so the polyglots there. Thank you.
Yes, welcome. Jesus, you want to go next?
Okay, I'm Jesus Ameiro. I work with Alex in the Polyglots team where we develop the traduction environment. I'm from Spain, from the north of Spain. I speak two languages, Galician and Spanish. And I think it's a very, very interesting tool to improve our translations. So I hope you're going to use this tool in the future.
Right. Jenny? All right, you can also feel free to use the chat rooms if you want to type in. Okay, so I have started to recording. All right, so today's the topic is using the Translate Live tool with Alex Kirk. Thank you, Alex, for your time. Alex is an automation contributor to Meta and Polyglots team in Make WordPress. So with that, I want to hand over to Alex to start the session. Let's start with a brief introduction of yourself and then go ahead.
Cool.
Yeah.
So first off, I'm sorry, my voice is a bit damaged in the last days, but it's better. So every now and then I might have to take a short break. So I'm Alex Kirk. I am in Austria, in Vienna. I'm, as Sam said, sponsored by Automatic to work on the Polyglots team, but also on the Meta team on WordPress.org. And part of our work is to improve WordPress and the translation environment. And one of the projects that we made is Translate Live, that is supposed to make a translation a bit easier and easier to access. So that's what I'm going to talk about today. So I'm going to share my screen. I hope you can see it all right.
Yes.
Cool. So then I'll get started. So what does translating WordPress mean? So we start off by, it's mostly about contributing translations from English to a language that you speak. So WordPress and plugins are translated from English because they're created in English as the primary language. So you can translate WordPress core, plugins, and themes. And for many, this translation is the first step into contributing to WordPress. It's we've got a huge population around the world who doesn't speak English and who would like to have WordPress in their own language. And the polyglots offer a quite easy way of getting started. That's why it also makes sense to invest in community events into translating and helping facilitate translation. It all happens at translate.wordpress.org. That's a WordPress install. And there is the Polyglots Translators Handbook, which helps new contributors to get started. So this is what it looks like. It's quite a bit to read. It's important to know because There's translation guidelines. If everybody adheres to the same general rules, then the translation can sound coherent, but people need to know about those rules. And then typically when you start translating, you would go to an environment like this. You have the original string on the left side and translation on the right side. And there's different statuses for translation. So you can see that in the legend upon here, there's like current, waiting, which means it's been contributed by somebody who's kind of new to the project and whose translation needs to be verified. And there's also fuzzy and other statuses. But for languages where you don't have anything translated, you typically arrive at a view like this, where there's no translations on the side and everything is white. So when you enter a translation, you click on the entry and then you go to this field and you can see this text field where you can enter your translation. But if you look at this, what are you actually translating? The information about what you're translating is pretty small. It's like on the top here, you can see it's a plugin, and this plugin is called Friends. And the first string is no activity inbox found, which sounds like an error message. And you might be confused why this would be the first thing that you should be translating. So the reason for this is that GlotPress has a default sorting order. And the default is actually by priority and then ascending. So the idea would be that a plugin author could mark certain strings as very important, and they should be translated first. And a bit of the problem here is that if there's no priority, or like everything is the same priority, then the rest will be sorted by the date when the last original was added. So after a plugin update, new strings will be added and they will be at the top, which makes a lot of sense when there's like the plugin is already translated and you all have to keep up with the new strings. But it doesn't make sense when you start from like with a new language on a project. So that means often you start translating somewhere in the middle. It doesn't make too much sense. If you go up to 100%, that makes sense to like fill the gaps. But if you want to get started, you would probably want to get started with the strings that you see first. And then in the table view, there's missing context. Sometimes it's a one-word text, and it's really hard to know and important to know for translating. Is this on a button, or is it a headline? Is it a verb, or is it a noun? And that's something that sometimes is really hard to decide just from the table view. On the upside, there are some ecosystem tools that are very helpful. And since the translation has happened in the table view over the time, this view has been extended with additional tools. So there's discussion where you can ask questions about the string, or you view discussions that happened on a string. You can see previous translations. For the placeholders, there's a like they are highlighted, and you can know which placeholders you're still missing to translate. There's warnings when you have things like additional spaces or missing punctuation, stuff like that. And then there's the glossary where the community has agreed on certain translations to be the same across all of the strings. So we always want to translate this word into that so that we have consistency. Sometimes it can be helpful to see what are translations for the same string in other languages. There's a translation memory, which gives you previous translations in other projects that you can just reuse. And you can actually also get machine translation, which is a bit of a topic on its own. But if you provide a DeepL API string or a OpenAI key, we can ask that API for you so that you can get machine translation. And there's also been a community developed browser extensions like Glottic that can be very helpful for translating. But now, Translate Live, what are we doing differently here? So it's more of a hands-on approach. It's built on the WordPress Playground, which is a project that allows running WordPress in the browser. So it runs WordPress and the plugin or theme that you're translating in your browser window. And then it provides the ability to do inline translation through this local GlotPress project. And then when you're ready, you can submit it back to translate.wordpress.org. So this is what it looks like. This is a WordPress running, and it's very colorful, but that every colored string means that it can be right-clicked and you can modify the string. So in this case, there is a lot already translated, which shows up in green. And there's a yellow string where I've already entered a translation. And you can also see that there's glossary entries highlighted. There is a translation suggested. This one is by OpenAI. And yeah, at the bottom is then something that I will show a bit later, where you communicate back to translate.wordpress.org. So the features of Translate Live are, on the one hand, you can visually see what the current state is. We just saw before, a lot is already translated. You can see this through a green view, basically. You can add new translations and modify existing ones right on the screen. You can try translations without submitting them. As I said before, like, you need to submit them back. That also means that you can try a translation and see how it sounds together with other translations, but not submit it yet. On translate.wordpress.org, you need to submit every translation as a suggestion as soon as you press enter. You can't do like a temporary something. And we've added tools that are available in the table view. Not all of them, but the placeholders is there, warnings and glossary, and the machine translation. So how can you access it? On the table view on the top right, there is actually a Translate Live link. And when you click that, it will open for the plugin and the language that you have selected. So let me show you a quick demo here. So if I go to this tab here, I'm in the plugin as I showed before. And if we click Translate Live here, it will go to Translate Live. It will load WordPress and download a few things that are necessary to load it. And then it boots up and shows you the WP admin screen, and you can already see some strings are already highlighted here. And that's a part of the challenge here, is that you need to now find where does the plugin actually add stuff. So in this case, it's I suppose quite obvious that here's the friends, sorry, the friends page, and here are the strings from before. And if you right-click one, you can see like here's the glossary pop over, and I could enter a new translation. So for a reviewing task, I could go here and read what has been already translated and verify that it sounds good in context, and I can modify it. And if I modify something, let's just do something to make some sort of change. It will show in yellow so that I can see what did I modify. And here at the bottom, it will show that this translation, this is a kind of a PO file is the name of the file format, and it shows the translation that I've made. So this is now temporary, it's not submitted. And if I'm ready to submit this to translate.wordpress.org, I would just use this link down here. So if, for example, we go to another language, or actually I can also click here and change this, for example, to French. So this will now reload the same thing, but in French, and the translation percentage in French is not as good. You can see there's a red string here and also one here. And I could right-click it, and now it gives me the, it queries OpenAI, and I could just use this translation for now and save it. And I can go along and continue to translate. And as you can see, I can translate what I see first. So if I go here, I can go along and continue translating. Like, I don't speak French too well, so I could just go on and add more strings like that. But you can see the point as in, you can continually translate the UI, and you see the progress. You see what it's going to sound like in context, and you can know this is a headline, so it needs to be translated in that way. So if I just go back, there's one more flow that I wanted to show. If you go to the plugins page, So for a new contributor, you would typically go through this flow. You would ask them like, what do you want to translate? And you would send them to the plugins directory, and they could search for a plugin that they know, or they can browse any plugin that works well for them. So I don't know, let's go to this one, for example. And you would go here to development, which is a bit of a weird placement, but then translate the plugin in your language. And let's see, here we go. So now I could suggest I would want to, oh, what's going on? Oh, this is just a README. All right. I'm suffering from 502s at WordPress.org. But let's see. Let's try this one here. So this is any random plugin, and let's go to French again. And here would I click the translate live link? Okay, this one doesn't have too many strings, but let's check it out. So it will boot up WordPress in the language that I've selected, installs the plugin, and then here it's there. I suppose in this one there's not too many strings. Doesn't even show here. Well, let's see for the demo effect. Let's try one more. But you get the point. You can basically go to any plugin that works. I'm particularly not using a big plugin, although we could use this one. Because part of what makes Translate Live interesting is to translate something that hasn't been translated so far. Because you can start off with a translation from zero and know what needs to be translated first. So now is contact form 7 loading, and let's see. I don't see it in here. I think right now there's something going on with WordPress.org. But here you can see it. This comes from contact form 7, and you can right click here and you can go ahead and modify any translations that don't sound well. Cool. All right, so let's recap a bit the good and bad or to improve sides of Translate Live. So as I showed, it's very quick to get started. You see the plugin, you see the strings that you want to translate. It's quite obvious what you want to address first, what you want to translate first. It actually works without a WordPress account, WordPress.org account, so you can go ahead and just start translating, and instead of submitting it, you would receive a PO file. So you could try it out, try to contribute, and then when you see you are ready to submit something, you can use the PO file that you got earlier and then submit that in form of translation. So it's very visual. You can see what you're translating. And as I mentioned before, it's quite good for translating a plugin or theme to a new language from scratch. So when there's nothing translated yet, you have a red screen and you can turn it green. That's quite rewarding to see, like, this is the change that I made, and therefore now the plugin is translated. Versus when you go ahead and translate the table view, you might start with a string that's not very well translated. You know, it's translated somewhere and you don't actually see it. So you might be losing effort of translating something that's not visible immediately. And the other thing that I also showed, it's reviewing existing translations. For that, it's pretty good. You can see what's translated, and verify that it sounds well and fix it if it's not sounding well right on the spot. So you can see the translated items in context. You know, like this is on a button and I modify it, and it's the string on the button that I modify. And one other thing is sometimes there's space constraints on translation. So something is very short in English and in other language it's long, and therefore it throws off the design or layout. But in this case, you can actually see like this would fit there, and I can translate it accordingly. Things that are good to know is you need to be careful to actually submit your translations. It's a benefit to be able to try translations without submitting them, but also remember to do submit them when you're ready. On plugins that have a very high translation percentage, it can be hard to find the string that's not translated. So it will be there, and you can translate it to 100%. You could go through all screens, but typically it's more useful to go to the table view and translate from there. And because it actually will show you like this is not translated. In Translate Live, you get the actual view that a user sees. And the performance, it depends, especially in WordCamp or Meetup environments, the connection can be a bit flaky. So that might impact things because WordPress and it actually downloads PHP in this WASM format. So this initially takes quite a bit of bytes to download, and that's something just to consider. As you might have also seen, and I could just briefly show this here, up here there's a string not translated, not translatable. This is clearly translatable, but it didn't detect it. So sometimes it's not recognized, and it depends on certain circumstances, and I'll quickly go into how it works later so that they can explain this. Very large plugins can be a bit slow, so WooCommerce or Yoast, I think, is also one that, like, the larger the plugin is, the more strings there are. Jetpack is also one. The slower it will become because there's a lot of data that needs to be loaded. So take that into consideration if it makes sense to work with those plugins. Also, some plugins, like especially WooCommerce, like when you boot up WordPress with the plugin installed, so in Translate Live, it will start from scratch. Some plugins need to be set up. So take that into consideration if you want to, or if you need to translate something somewhere in a screen further in the plugin, it can be hard to reach because you need to start from scratch. And then there's also this thing where some plugins actually rely on other plugins. So there's like something for WooCommerce, for example, and that means that you need WooCommerce installed, and only then the plugin will work. So this is something that we actually
Alex, you're muted.
Kind of muted, yeah.
Thank you.
Never mind.
Sorry.
At the time.
So where did I stop? So plugins that depend on other plugins, like WooCommerce, something for WooCommerce, for example. It needs WooCommerce installed, and in the playground, you don't have the other plugin installed. So we're hoping that this meta track ticket will help us here. It's actually around the plugin directory, also providing playground support. So you could go to the plugin directory, look at the plugin, and then start it up in the playground. And plugin authors will be able to provide those kind of blueprints which tell the playground, we first need to install this, or this setting needs to be set, or these posts need to be created. And we will want to reuse this for translation as well. I could also think about things like a plugin developer could show a plugin in some sort of error state, which is something that you don't really want to show for, but for a translator, it can be very useful to be actually able to see the error message that needs to be translated. So a blueprint could boot the Translate Live into this state, and then you can translate it as if it were broken. Just a quick dive into the technical details of how it works, and also a bit of explanation why it might not work. So when a translation is rendered, actually on the PHP side, the English texts are replaced with their translations. And then we actually need to do the inline translation. We need to use JavaScript. So we log those translations, submit them to JavaScript, and then in JavaScript, we need to find the strings in the UI and trace them back to the English texts so that you can right-click them. And for that right-clicking, we need to wrap them in an HTML tag. And so it can be a bit finicky, especially if English strings appear in the same HTML, like different strings appear in the same HTML tag. And it's really hard to disconcern the translation ends in the middle of this HTML tag, and then the next one is that one. That's something that doesn't work. And then it saves the translation in the local WordPress and exports it to a PO file, and then imports that PO file back to translate.wordpress.org. So summarizing, it's an easy way to get translation contributors started. It's accessible for all plugins and themes on translate.wordpress.org. There's this link on the top right that you can click, and it will boot up WordPress with that plugin. And that functionality for inline translation is actually something that we're planned to ship in WordPress 5.0, where you can install WordPress on your own WordPress, and it will provide this inline translation functionality for all plugins that you've got locally installed in your WordPress. We think that can be quite interesting if you, like as an agency, you want to ship a website in a certain language. You can use a local WordPress to ensure that everything can be translated. Previously, it has been kind of a finicky process of getting the translation submitted to translate.wordpress.org, and then to a certain percentage so that the language pack will be downloaded. So this is something where we hope to alleviate that and make it a bit easier to have a fully translated WordPress for clients, for example. So that's been the presentation. Thank you. And I'm open for any questions. I've seen there's a few been in chat already.
Yeah,
would you like to ask your
first,
questions? Yep.
Yeah, Patricia, do you want to ask your question by speaking it out?
Yes, I wrote in the chat. We have to submit every time we want to stop, or we can use the export and then import feature of the playground to continue where we stopped previously. I'm not sure if I'm clear.
Yeah, so the playground, it forgets everything as soon as you restart it. So the best way is to submit to translate.wordpress.org. At this point, everything will be submitted as waiting, even if you are a PTE of the project. So this is a bit of a cautionary move for the moment, but it also means that anything that you submit, it will be in waiting state. And if you put it back up, those waiting strings will be loaded again in favor of those that are already in the plugin. So by submitting it, you can restart your work.
Okay, but my question was about the playground as a feature to export. Not even if we don't use the translate live, the playground as a feature to save and reload.
True. Yeah.
Yeah. So would that reload, even if we don't submit, would that reload the string we translated as it exported the current state, right? Or maybe I can test it. So.
Yeah, I think so. We don't expose the export import feature in Translate Live. It's using kind of the Playground API. As far as I know, the Playground, when it exports and imports, it's more around like it uses the WordPress export functionality, which exports post types and like taxonomies and all of that. And WordPress has custom tables that won't be exported as far as I know. But exporting posts and configurations is something that would clearly be interesting for, you know, if you want to translate a plugin, and you need to set it up so that you can actually then save this setup state and pick that up when you continue translating. So that's certainly something that's worth considering.
Thank you.
All right, there is a question from Jenny in the chat. She's asking if it is possible to translate upcoming core WordPress core before it is released to the public.
Yeah, so at the moment, it doesn't support translating core. And one reason for that is that, as I showed before, the strings in PHP get translated, and there is this namespace sync with the text domain for the plugins. And WordPress core, the text domain has been split up into different areas. So there's the WP admin and the core, the front end strings. And in GlotPress, they're in different projects, but in when they are loaded into WordPress, they're all in the same text domain. So this is why we haven't yet been able to properly backtrace in which project is this string located. And that's why currently core is not available. What it does is it will show the translations from core. So if you translate in the table view, it is possible to see your translations before they're shipped. And it is something that we could try here. So if I go into this local GlotPress here, yeah, so you can see we've got the core the WordPress core different projects loaded here, but they're not available for translation. So we're on the course to get there. I think it is possible eventually to figure that out, but at this point the inline translation is not yet possible. And I also have to admit, as it's to get a 99% translated project, 100%, translate live might not be the best place because you have to hunt for the strings that are not translated.
Okay, it's a very impressive tool, Alex. So is there any other question from anyone else in the call? All right. Is there anything else from you, Alex?
Nothing except you can find the slides here. Contact me if you have any other questions. Also in the Polyglots meetings, we share new progress on that. Also on the Polyglots P2, you can find more information on projects that we work on with GlotPress. And we're happy to hear suggestions for how to improve things.
All right, then we will end the recording here.